eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is George Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 94 of the It Will Come show. And today, we're going to be talking about the 2020 pandemic and the rise in populism in relation to, of course, everything that's happening in the United States right now. There's been rioting, looting, just very big displays of anarchy in general. But on the flip side, there's also been a lot of displays of humanity coming in to help one another too. So, but what I really want to do is just sort of share my observations about what I'm seeing, how we kind of got to this point in terms of everything that was happening around the globe, and potentially what could happen next. So let's take a dive into it. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about the 2020 pandemic and populism. I'm going to talk first about George Floyd, so you can just look here in the lower right. What is populism? The global rise of it, where we're at, the light versus dark, and then rethinking the system. First up, George Floyd. So if you weren't aware yet already around sort of what caused the riots to sort of take place in the United States over the last couple of days or last week, it was from an incident that occurred where a white cop in the United States essentially had his knee on a African American man, and for about 9 minutes, and then essentially he died as a result. And the name of this guy is George Floyd. Now, it wasn't necessarily this one isolated incident, because I mean, I definitely have seen already on Twitter people talking about like, oh, you know, this happens all the time. Some people saying like, actually, you know, statistically more white people die than black people, and that all kind of shows just how much is not understood about what's going on under the surface, right? So it wasn't just the fact that George Floyd was murdered. He was essentially the catalyst for something that's been brewing for a long time in the United States. Right, in my opinion, the U.S. has kind of been sort of stuck in time almost over the last couple of decades. You know, they were once a great nation, but they definitely aren't anymore. And if you look at sort of the slogan for Donald Trump, "Let's make America great again," it's because it's not anymore in many regards. But you know, it has been sort of the best experiment to date about you know, bringing a whole bunch of different states together in a way that had never been done before. And so it's, you know, really interesting to see. And Bill, thanks for sharing. So yeah, 400 years, appreciate that. And yeah, you know, I'm sure a lot of people will be really interested in today's episode. So like Bill, if you have any comments, please feel free to share them as I'm speaking, and I'll try to get to them. All right. So yeah, and so what Bill's talking about, hopefully, it's not just the last couple of decades, right? It's the last couple centuries. But either way, the United States has definitely been a shining beacon for a lot of folks when it comes to, you know, freedom, liberty, etc. But we're starting to see also sort of the downsides of even just the mentality and the consciousness around freedom. Right, you know, freedom to the extreme, what that can cause. And so, populism. Now, this is not something that is unique to the United States itself. This image here is more an image from some video from YouTube, actually, and you know, as you can see, it's from 2017. So there's definitely been, over the last however many years, a rise in this concept of populism. And it's interesting to see when you actually look at you know, imagery from the riots in the United States. You know, the whole revolutionary anti-establishment gesture, right, of the closed fist is definitely being seen everywhere. And it's crazy, because when I look at a lot of the news that's coming out on Twitter, this could be taken out from a movie, right? This literally looks like something from the most recent Joker film when I was going through, and it's the last time I felt that way was probably 9/11. You know, when we were watching videos of the towers falling. It was just so surreal, and again, you know, you just feel like you're watching something out of a movie. So for those who don't know what populism is, it's more than just a simple definition because it's an ideology, right? So here, I'll just share this with you. It is a political style. So populism isn't really an ideology in itself, right? So it's not just that, but more of a way of expressing political views. This means that parties of all persuasions can be considered populist, whether they are left wing or right wing or something in between. Champions of the people. Populists believe themselves to be advocates for the people, who are disenfranchised from political processes. Right-wing populists might define the people in nationalist terms. Left-wing populists might define them as the working class. So it's very interesting to read again, right? When they say for the people, technically we are all people. But when they're saying the people, it's those who are disenfranchised from the political process, or those, and this is where sort of like the anti-elite comes in. It becomes very much about classes. And what's fascinating is if you look through history, there's always been these types of tension, right? Where you have a ruling elite and then you have the rest, the people. So as you can see, anti-elitist. Populists are opposed to political elites who they say are corrupt and unrepresentative of the people. Elites might include, for example, politicians who are more concerned with the interests of big business than the people. Critical of democracy, populists are suspicious of liberal democracy and are openly critical of democratic processes and institutions. I think in that regard, it's more just apathy, right? I think people are becoming apathetic because they do not feel, one, that they're being heard, two, that anything is being done, and three, that the whole political process is just useless now. If people don't feel or see the changes that they elect representatives in to help them, right, with their day-to-day problems, and if most of the changes are going to big business, this is a transparency issue too. Like, if people don't really feel the impact or effects in their day-to-day lives, they're going to become apathetic. And so, sometimes they advocate for direct democracy through protests or referendum votes where the people are more involved. So you can see here, this article was also last year, so back in 2019, but it was talking about the global rise of populism. And, folks like the president of the Philippines and the United States, right? I mean, this really kind of shows just what is happening, and you can see across the world that I think people have just become so fed up with what was previous that they're looking for, more leaders who are reflective of this sort of populist rhetoric. And so, I mean, this is interesting. This article is really talking about a report, how populism threatens liberal democracy. So democracy is at a threat, interestingly enough. And it's a slippery slope too, right? Because with populism also comes a desire for socialism, and with socialism, potentially communism, and we all know what happened there. Some people believe that actually what happened with communism in other countries wasn't true communism, right? So fascinating. And because I am personally a community guy, right? There are obviously a lot of things in communism and socialism that I may agree with, but as a whole system, I do not, because there's something called the tragedy of the commons. If you're not used to that, if you're not familiar with that, just go Google it, and you can read more about what exactly happens with the tragedy of the commons. But there's always this tension throughout history, which is seen is where if you go too individualistic and too towards or skew towards more of the elite and the one percenters and the minorities, then when it comes to power and wealth, then it leaves out the rest, and there's just increasing inequalities, increasing injustices. And so, essentially this report is looking at how populism can actually make the world more dangerous. Asia, Europe, and beyond. So, it's a very interesting times, guys. This I saw, which was really fascinating, right? As I mentioned, I am a community guy, but I also, because of being raised in the West, I also look at the benefits of individualism. But if you were to probably summarize my own philosophies, it is more Taoist, right? Like yin and yang. So I believe there's a time for individualism and a time for more of the communal aspect where you're thinking more about the we and the us. But this is a book by Steve Hilton. I found this on the web, and I thought it was interesting, right? Because there are those who look at populism as a negative thing, and then of course there are those who look at populism as a positive thing. You can see here revolutionary ideas to rebuild economic security, family, and community America. And now, actually, I was actually considering calling today's episode "Broken Families, Broken Communities, and a Broken System," because I did want to tie in the community aspect and actually what I see. And if you look at sort of the increasing statistics of broken homes, broken families, that has actually a direct correlation with broken communities, right? And we can see, if you want to look at it this way, that the sort of having capitalism and having individualism and a focus on efficiency in these sort of markets has led to more broken homes, right? Because those traditional values you don't see as much. And I personally think that actually, if we did want to help heal things, that we should actually focus on fixing our families first, because you can start small there. But the problem is we've gone so far beyond what we can do to reverse, things that have already been set in motion, that it's hard to do just that right now. There really does, unfortunately, need to be a very strong, violent, systemic change, which is already happening. And if any of you are have been involved in change management or are familiar with it, right? When it comes to change management as a professional endeavor, there's generally two ways to change. One is slow over time, so that people ease their way in, and then there's fast but abrupt change, right? And generally, this one happens when people can't see the need to move slow, right, and move slowly over time for the change to take effect. So what ends up happening is there's a very fast, abrupt change, which does cause a lot of damage, but it means that things happen quicker. And that's kind of now what's happening, because we've just hit a peak where what can we do? What can you do? So going back here. So yeah, populism, they're looking at ways to rebuild security, family, and community in America. And I think this is why I'm actually so passionate about communities as a subject matter in general, anyways, and why the sponsors for this show, FIA, is actually in the business of that, because we believe in bridging sort of the gap between people and tech, because we see that also the advancement in tech in general is actually pushing or forcing others to feel left out, right? And when you have that take place, you then also see sort of the income inequalities rise too, right? Because the skill sort of gaps and shortages. And so with that, you need to actually ensure that people are also kind of keeping up with the technological change, so that they can also upskill themselves to be able to get better jobs as things are changing. But if that doesn't take place and people don't move with that or aren't supported, even from a systemic level, we start to see these things, right? It's all connected, right? The economics, the social, the technological, all of it is connected. Now, I'm bringing this up again because this was something that I shared in a few previous episodes, right? And this chart was put together by Ray Dalio. There's a great article on LinkedIn called the Big Cycles of the Last 500 Years. So, Bill, if you're still watching, 400 years is about right. Ray Dalio looked at the last 500 years. He looked at the trends of most major empires and their rises and falls. And you can see here, we are currently in the Revolution and Wars. And it's crazy because literally over the last week, I was just talking about, we went through the printing money and credit bit, right? If you recall, over the last couple of weeks, the United States and many other countries around the world have just been printing money as part of their stimulus packages. And so as a result of that, they, essentially devaluing their own currencies. And so when they're saying printing money, I kind of go with the Mike Maloney definition. So I wouldn't say it's money that they're printing currency and credit. And as a result, this always leads to revolutions and wars. So the equivalent of, even if you go back to the Roman Empire, the equivalent of them printing currency was actually diluting gold. So, right, gold was the original money. And with those coins, in order to start, manipulating things, they started diluting it and mixing the gold with copper and other sort of metals. What that does is it dilutes the actual value of the thing that they are transacting with, right, or paying. And then that actually has longer term ramifications, which we eventually saw with the fall of the Roman Empire itself. And this seems to happen every time for many empires. And so, yeah, we're quite predictable, right? And then the revolution and war. So we're already seeing this, right? If we kind of go back to that image here, right? We are currently in the phase of rioting, revolutions, and wars. And I think as a result of this, and I don't think we've seen the last of it, right? Like, so it's just beginning. I think, we might get another wave again in around September when people realize that their unemployment checks don't start to dry up or something. Definitely the $1,200 a week or a month. I don't know how long that's going to last, really, because the government cannot just keep printing and giving people free money when there's nothing to really back it up with. And if people understood just how the money system works, they'll realize the problems with this. And so, yeah, I think around September, so we're looking at quarter 4. We will start to see another wave of issues, maybe a lot greater than what we're currently seeing. So it's sort of like a calm before another a storm, really, because I know a lot of countries around the world are also starting to open back up, and it's crazy, right? Now that coronavirus hit, but now the focus is on all the riots that are taking place. And so after revolutions and wars, we got the debt and political restructuring. Okay. So this is where debts might be wiped out, and there will be either a new form of government or, things will essentially need to change, right? It might be in the form of maybe more digital democracy, where all countries try to push for digital ballots. Who knows? Blockchain could definitely be very useful for that, but we're not quite there yet, unfortunately. And then you've got the New World Order. The New World Order aspect or phase is when you essentially have the powers that be, right? If there is a hot war, whoever wins that become part of the New World Order, right? The United States were part of the last World War, so they became, the strongest superpower, or one of them, right? Alongside, they still, I think, were alongside the UK and the other allies. And then with the New World Order, they will have a greater say in terms of what happens next. And so in some of my previous episodes, I did talk about China as being one to watch. Essentially, US, China, Russia, those three I have my eyes on. China is already doing some very interesting things in the background, and they're putting pressure on a few contentious issues and nations, I will say. And so, I am generally an optimistic guy, but I'm also not ignorant to what's happening now. And so I share this to hopefully help you prepare yourself. And so with this, the pandemic creates ideal conditions for the rise of populism. So hopefully everything I've been sharing with you sort of highlights that in terms of, how the pandemic itself has created the perfect storm. So with COVID-19, if you think about it, you've forced people into lockdown, especially in a country like the United States, whereby freedom is a very strong value. I was speaking to my auntie last night as well, and it's fascinating because they were sharing too, like what the sentiment is. Generally very skeptical of things, anything to do with China, and they're getting mixed messages about what they should be doing in terms of gathering, and there's just a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainties, right? But the pandemic itself, you've forced people into isolation, and you've taken away their freedoms, their perceived freedoms, and then you had what happened with George Floyd, right? And so this was just a disaster waiting to happen, right? All these events really is just sort of magnifying what was already there. It's not the events in isolation themselves that's the problem. It's that they are a symbol or reflection of what has always been there, right? And it's just taken this, unfortunately, to make it a bigger thing. And so, yeah, this particular article was just kind of highlighting more, what is creating the ideal conditions. And I think what I've just highlighted is that, right? And now, if you actually have a few observations of your own, please feel free to just put it in the comments, and we can have a chat about it. But dark versus light. So I think I put as an overview at the beginning, right? As one of the sections, dark versus light. So even though there's a lot of craziness happening right now, I think for those who are not, I guess, that emotionally together, right, and can't deal with all this seeming negative news, right, uh, on the plus side, you have these type of stories whereby what you're seeing here is I think a cop got separated from his squad, and a few other locals actually went to protect him from other people who were wanting to beat up this cop. And so you can see how there's this tension again, right? So it started off with some peaceful protests in regards to George Floyd, but I believe there were instigators or anarchists who used this event or these events to actually start rioting and cause havoc. And that's been part of the issue right now, which is why I have a love and hate relationship with Twitter, because you do get to see everything raw on the ground, right? Because everyone's just posting it to Twitter. And so what you decide to magnify or highlight determines what is seen. And so I usually like to share both light and dark, so that you can see that nothing is all doom and gloom, that there's always hope and faith too that comes with that, no matter how dark things seem to get. So this was really encouraging to see. And then in another state, this was kind of cool as well. The local cops and the sheriff was saying, that they actually stand with the people. And he ended up with his squad, I believe, walking with the local protesters peacefully in solidarity. And I think this is definitely great to see, because I know just how much hatred and animosity there is for many other cops, but not all cops are bad. And that's why I hear some people on Twitter, saying that like, yeah, not all cops are bad. And it's like, yes, there's truth to that. I agree, but you're not seeing properly like what the George Floyd incident was a symbol of, what it was a catalyst of for other things that were there already, right? There's this movie called Us. Was it Us? No, the one just before Us. Oh, can't remember the name. But it was a great sort of look into this underlying racial tension that does lie in the United States, and I think it's something that does need to be brought out. It's a shame that it happens to occur violently right now, but it's a conversation that we can no longer sweep under the rug, and it's going to come as part of what we were looking at, right? With the I'm trying to find it. With this cycle. Okay, so let's go. And then yes, again, right, reverse rioting. So yes, after all the riots took place, you wouldn't see much of this, or at least this shown in the mainstream media. But there was a whole army of volunteers, of people, locals, who went and cleaned up all the mess of the rioters, right? And this is what I believe in, right? This is humanity. And then finally, this particular quote was from Mark Storm. The pandemic has revealed the danger of prizing efficiency above all else. The recent slowdown in our lives points to another way of doing things. And I would have to agree. The efficiency, there's extremities to everything, right? And this is why I'm such a big fan of the yin-yang symbol, right? You always have a little dot in both sides. And so if you find yourself as a culture, civilization, community, group, whatever, moving too far to one area, just the very nature of the yin-yang is it's going to flip you over to the other side. And that's what we're seeing now, in my opinion, right? We might have gone too individualistic, we might have gone too capitalistic, and we might have gone, pursued too much maybe efficiency and innovation. And so this is why I think we are going to have a return to traditional values to balance ourselves out. So even like my grandparents' generation, which wasn't that long ago, they, had a lot of those traditional values. If you look back at World War period and whatnot. And I think I've been seeing a lot more people talk and use the types of words like honor, duty, trust, being responsible. The reason why those things are coming back, in my opinion, is because there is too much of its opposite, right? And so with that, it highlights the need for us to bring these things back, because we've become a bit too reckless on the opposite end. And so I definitely feel like we are going to see a political restructuring, right, as we showed here. And so once that takes place, I don't know what that's going to look like, but there was actually, it's kind of fascinating because there's a game I play called Civilization. So if I look up I'm just going to bring this up as sort of the last thing. All right. So in this game, Civilization 6, which is a strategy game, right? Which is crazy too, because I kind of see parallels between things that I've learned from this game and just what's happening right now. But in this game, there are these government types, right? And so they go throughout history. If you look here, at the very beginning, they had chiefdoms, right? And then there was the autocracy and the classical republic, and then an oligarchy. Then they had the merchant republic, the monarchies, the theocracy. Then came communism, and then democracy, and fascism. But in the future, right, they've kind of posited their own possible government types. And I actually kind of agree with some of them, but the three that they've created are, one is a digital democracy, a synthetic technocracy, and a corporate libertarianism, right? Now, all of these are actually quite possible. The one that I think is highly likely is this digital democracy, because if you look at sort of blockchain technology and what it enables, and if you've been watching my show, you'll be familiar with it, digital democracy has a chance. Now, there are definitely flaws in democracy itself, but it is the best that we got right now. And so we haven't been able to have a true democracy because there's still so many elements that are required in order for a true democracy to work. But with a digital democracy, they have something called distributed sovereignty, right? If you look at what's been happening in the Bitcoin land or the blockchain world, these are keywords that is used a lot. So we go into digital democracy. They talk here about what is entailed. So you can see the great advantage of a direct participatory democracy is that every citizen is allowed to a say in the matter of state with their own voice. But even the most ardent fans of direct democracy must admit it scales very poorly, right? So scaling is an issue with democracy. Since Athenians have been shouting themselves hoarse in the agora, political philosophers have looked for more efficient, scalable democracies. Advances in technology, most especially the rise of the internet and the connected world, have given hope that the scaling problem of democracy can be resolved in the future. In a digital democracy, specific questions would be formulated as referenda, and frequently put forth for public discussion and comment and voting. Citizens could read the arguments, proffer their own, and vote on the matter using readily available technologies like smartphones. Now, again, right, where it says citizens can read the arguments and prefer their own, that only works with an educated populace, right? And it only works if people take the time to read. Unfortunately, many nations that try to implement a democracy don't necessarily have a educated populace in its entirety, or have the means for people to be able to read, right, and actually know what they're reading. So many internet communities already include metrics of participation. There's my favorite word, communities, right? Voting on popular topics, liking comments, rebroadcasting, and so forth. These provide a rough estimation of the social capital of the participants, and some political philosophers believe these sorts of systems could be extended to political questions. This would ostensibly allow for a greater level of grassroots participation, since a good idea could come from anyone in the community. Another feature is that policies would have broad popular support, which is a desirable feature if you believe that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. Early strong proponents of the digital democracy were confident that it could avoid demagoguery or obstreperous malicious actions by a minority of participants. There is some reason to be skeptical of this claim. Whether or not the digital democracy of the future will deliver the promised participatory utopia or be forever distracted by cat pictures and flame wars remains an open question. All right. So, that's, again, this is just looking a bit into the future, what is possible. And, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, today's show. And if you have any questions or comments or observations of your own, please feel free to put it in the comments below. Because this is being restreamed across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, I'll just try to check in each of those and reply to you there. But with that, again, I hope you got some value out of today. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to subscribe from wherever it is that you're tuning in from. And as always, remember, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.